Thank you very much. So this is my first time presenting in person in 2.5 years, so I'm grateful to be back with you all in person. I really want to follow up on, I'm not a medical oncologist, I'm not a radiation oncologist, I'm not a surgeon. I'm a rehab person that really focuses on recovery. And one of the areas that I've been more and more interested in over the last several years is this idea of resiliency. And I really want to expand upon something Dr. Singh said, and thinking about hope and how do we access that space when one has gone through challenging times. And I know going through this process for almost everyone is challenging. So to me, the fundamental questions, and again, this is my bias, but ultimately, we're spending a lot of time thinking about cure and remission and treatment response and all these critically important things. But ultimately, these are means, in my opinion, to the sense of being healthy or being fulfilled or feeling like we're whole again. And so I put a few fundamental questions, and these are not cancer questions, right? These are questions about our humanity in general. What does it mean to be resilient and fulfilled and whole and healthy? And I mention this because as a supportive care type physician, I prescribe, antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs and pain medicines, and I think they're important tools. But there is no medication that will fundamentally answer these questions. And so I think it's more along, again, what kinds of thoughts can we engage in? What kind of behaviors can we engage in to try to achieve some of these ideas? And we have a 12-hour group that we run. I'm going to try to spend 15 minutes or so just to kind of highlight a couple of what I think are key ideas. The first being this idea of meaning and purpose. And I'll start with an anecdote. This picture, you may have seen this gentleman. His name is Mr. Israel Crystal. He got some attention a few years ago because in 2016, he had the Guinness World Book Records for being the oldest male alive in the world at 112. Actually passed away 1 year later at 113. What really made his story quite remarkable was not only did he make it to 112 and later 113, he actually was a survivor of the Holocaust. So he lost everyone that was important to him. He whittled down, I think, to something like 89 pounds. He suffered incredibly, but he still made it to this incredible age. And so in one of the interviews, when he was getting all this attention in 2016, that everyone was asking him this question of, well, how did you do it? How did you suffer so much yet still make it to 112? And this is just one passage that I pulled out from his interview. This is what he said. I don't know the secret for long life. I believe that everything is determined from above and we shall never know the reason why. There have been smarter, stronger, and better looking men than me who are no longer alive. All that is left for us to do is to keep on working as hard as we can and rebuild what is lost. I have no idea how he made it to 113, and I'm sure luck and genetics and other factors played a big role. But if I had to guess, that last sentence may have had something to do with his longevity, right? He was telling us that he had some incredible sense of meaning and purpose that sustained him. He had a job, he had a mission. And this is, of course, just an anecdote, and it's hard to know what to make of this, but this has been talked about. So Dr. Viktor Frankl, some of you may be familiar with his work. He wrote an incredible book called Man's Search for Meaning. And one of his basic ideas had to do with this sense of meaning and purpose. He also was a Holocaust survivor, but he was a psychiatrist. And so he was very observant about his surroundings. And during those years, he also suffered, right? He lost his pregnant wife. His entire family were all imprisoned and perished. He suffered, he also endured starvation and infectious illnesses and incredibly hard working conditions and on and on and on. And one of the things he observed was, let's say 1 in 10 people survived the camps. His theory was that what they seemed to have in common is they all had a meaning for their suffering, right? They had something to work towards. They had to get back to their art, to their teaching, to write a book about this experience, or to do something that was very, very personally important to them. And that led to his philosophy called logotherapy, which is this idea that if we can find a sense of meaning and purpose, we could almost get through anything. His idea was, he quoted Nietzsche often, who said, "He who has a strong enough why can overcome any how." But it was the why that he wanted his patients to focus more upon. So his basic theory was that we can find meaning through our work, and it doesn't have to be through paid work. It could be through volunteering or acts of service, through acts of love or of caring for other people, or acts of courage, particularly when we're going through a difficult time. So work, love, or courage. Those were his ideas. And his book is filled with amazing quotes. This is one of the ones I love. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So he had this belief after what he went through that the Nazis could not take away his ability on how he's going to respond to his situation. And that was what he was trying to teach others through his work, that if you were here, he would say, cancer cannot take away our ability to respond to the situation that we're in. And so he wrote that book after World War II. This is in the 40s, or let's say early 50s, when his work came out. Just a few years ago, this study was published, and this looked at over 130,000 individuals. And in the study, they basically knew all the factors that are associated with longevity. So they knew who had diabetes and heart disease, and who was a smoker, and who was overweight and whatnot. And even when they factored that all in statistically, when they compared the individuals that had the strongest sense of purpose compared to those that had the least sense of purpose in their own life, and you can see the numbers here, there was about a 17% reduction in all-cause mortality. There was a 17% reduction in cardiovascular events. That means things like heart attacks and strokes. So this, I think, did begin to provide some validity to what Dr. Frankl wrote about almost 75 years prior. That, again, having a sense of purpose, it may not guarantee anything, but it may provide at least some edge, some benefit that may be worth thinking about. So one of the other things that Frankl kind of beckoned his readers to do is to ask the question, what does life expect from me? Rather than, let's face it, what most of us do, and I think I'm as guilty as this as anyone, is ask the question, what do I expect from life? And I know it's just a very subtle changing of the positioning of the words, but the implications probably couldn't be greater. So of course, what I expect from life means it's a more hedonistic. We're going to talk about that perspective. It's more about what I want and what I expect, and what does life expect from me. And Frankl argued you could use the word God, you could use the word creator, you could use the word life, however you want to interpret that. It puts a little bit more responsibility in how we're engaging in the world. And I want to talk about that. Remember, he wrote about this many, many years ago. There's one more recent study that I think provides some perspective on what he wrote about 75 years ago. A little background on this study. They looked at people who were very strongly hedonistic or eudaimonic. I'll define this. So a hedonistic person, I think we all know, is someone who's generally a pleasure seeker. right? Somebody who enjoys, if you're at a dinner party, they're there for the filet mignon and the champagne and nice wine and nice music, being dressed up nice. And then there's this other personality trait called eudaimonic personality, which refers basically to this idea that we're more concerned about virtue or service or community or doing meaningful kinds of behaviors. Now, what the investigators did is they looked at people who were all happy. So on these questionnaires that people fill out, everyone reported high levels of well-being. So they were happy on the surface, but they analyzed their blood. So they kind of looked in their inner biology. And I know it's kind of a busy figure, and I just want to focus on one part, on part B of this image. What they found, and I think this is really interesting, the hedonistic group had more what they call pro-inflammatory cytokines. So I think many of you heard this idea that inflammation or chronic inflammation is associated with many of our chronic health problems. They had lower levels of antibodies. And the eudaimonic group had virtually the reverse. They had much lower levels of inflammatory compounds, and you could see their antibodies were much higher. So at least it provides a glimpse into how our biology may be changing based on how we interact and engage with the world. And again, this study came out in 2013, over the last decade. But then again, if we go back to Frankl, remember, one of his arguments was that, the people that seem to have some sense of hope and purpose and meaning, rather than just reacting to their situation, his argument was, somehow they seem less likely to succumb to the infectious illnesses that were rampant in the camps, for example. And again, I have no idea, this is just a guess on my part. Maybe the fact that their antibodies, right, were much higher may have something to do with this. And so this idea of what do I expect from life may be more in line with a hedonistic outlook. Whereas when one goes about life asking, what does life expect from me? That may be more in line with the eudaimonic output. And I'm running out of time, I realize, so I'm gonna skip this next part, but I just want to summarize what I was going to talk about, which is this study that I'm not going to get into the details of showed that over 6 weeks, you could actually change those markers that I was referring to, just based on how you're engaging in the world. So for just 6 weeks in the study, they had individuals making a pie for their neighbor or calling a friend or doing some kind of acts of service or kindness in small ways. And they were actually able to show that in 6 weeks, they were able to meaningfully change these biomarkers. So this is the group that did acts of kindness for others. And in all the other conditions, including the group that was doing self-care, I know there's a lot of attention on, which is important. I'm not minimizing the importance of self-care, but I would argue that self-care alone probably won't offer the kind of benefits that studies like this are showing. The other idea I want to mention, which is hard, particularly when we are navigating an oncology environment, is trying to still maintain some sense of perspective and balance in how we're seeing the world. This was a quote attributed at least to the Buddha. He said, "Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts, unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother." So this idea of just learning to take control of our thoughts without thinking that, that everything is perfect in life. Right? It's possible to believe that there are challenges in the world and not being a Pollyanna about things, but still maintaining some sense of perspective. And again, Frankl talked about this in the middle of the concentration camps. And I refer to him because I probably have no credibility talking about these things, but someone who truly suffered and espouse these ideas, I think has much more credibility. So this is what he said. He said, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And believe me, I know this is not easy, right? It's not easy to do this, but I think what people like Frankl remind us is that as humans, we still have this capacity if it's something that we put a little attention to. And there's a similar quote that's attributed to being inspired by Frankl's work, which is the following: "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." And the last minute, I just want to spend, again, a second on another idea that we spend a couple hours talking about in the program. I'm going to try to relate it in just a minute or two, which is thinking about our legacy. I know this is a word that many of us are uncomfortable with because the reality is in our society, most of us don't like thinking about our own mortality and the fact that all of us are not going to be around forever. I think if there's one lesson we learned from the pandemic, it was that we're all mortal beings at some point. But there's this idea that among people who study legacy, that learning that may actually allow us to live actually more full lives. With the idea being that, when I was in school or in college, we learned how to like invest our money and with economics courses and business courses and whatnot, but we didn't really learn much about how to invest our time. And the idea being that if we don't think about our sense of mortality, right? If we thought we'd all live 10,000 years, we'd just, probably let time go by without thinking about how we're truly investing it. But if we're paying attention to the idea that all of us, and I hope it's as long as possible, are only here for a defined period of time, that we'll spend a little bit more time on the things that are important but not urgent, which is one of the challenges that I think we live with. And I think there's even a psalm that talks about this. It says, "Teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom." And I'm not a very religious person, but how I interpret this is that if we learn that our days are numbered, right? If we learn that all of us are only here for a certain amount of time, we'll have more wisdom, right? We'll have more insight on spending time on the things that are really important to us. Maya Angelou wrote about this as well, and I'll close with her words. She said, "You have no idea what your legacy will be. Your legacy is what you do every day. Your legacy is every life you've touched, every person whose life was either moved or not. It's every person you've harmed or helped. That's your legacy." And the reason I like this quote is it reminds us that whether we're paying attention to it or not, we're all making our marks. And I think Maya Angelou's point is, if we pay attention to how we're spending our moments and our days and whatnot, we'll probably engage in things that are more important to us and more meaningful to us. And I think that's really her goal with this quote. I wish I had more time, but I'll just close with a summary of what I think are some keys for enhancing a sense of resiliency. So one, as Frankl talked about, trying to engage in meaning-centered living as much as possible. And I'm stuck, but I think I have the rest of it by memory. Trying to maintain a sense of perspective. And again, trying to cultivate a sense of gratitude. It doesn't mean that we have to think that life is perfect to to experience gratitude for the things that we're authentically able to experience gratitude for. Here we go. Integrating a sense of legacy in the way that I was just referring to a moment ago. We didn't talk about it today, but the reason I'm glad we're here in person is connecting with others and people that particularly share our journeys, turns out is really important to our resiliency. And trying to be mindful or meditating a few minutes every day, again, helps us with a sense of perspective. And probably the best medicine of all, trying to bring in a little sense of humor helps. And we know that there's ample evidence that it helps with our resiliency. So we do have a 6-week program that we run to try to, embody these ideas in a little bit more detail. I left my contact info if it might be helpful to you. And if there's a minute or so, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Are there any questions from the room? Okay, there's a couple folks online. So Kaylee, so I'll turn it over to you.
There actually wasn't a question online. It's just a comment, and they said, "Thank you so much. This was wonderful and just what I needed."
Anyone? Oh, Gina, I'll be right there.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. I mean, I'm trying to remember everything that you said so I can quote it to my patients. And I'll try to give you some credit for it. Say, Dr. Asher said this. That was really good. Actually, I'm just going to answer one of these questions online, and then maybe ask you how patients could deal with this. So, patient asks, how long are the average survival rates for having PEComa? I've been stage 4 for 2 years now, and right now, somewhat staying stable with my Votrient treatment, and I've been on for 9 months. And how many PEComa patients have there been? So, the question about survival rates, I think it's important that, those are rates of all the other patients, okay? And that's not about your survival, right? So your survival, you can live with the cancer as long as it's not affecting your major organs. So you need your major organs to live: heart, lungs, liver, kidney, brain, maybe not, right? So, so you don't want to be focusing on the survival rates of others. You want to be just focusing on yourself. So if someone has been on treatment for 9 months and the Votrient stable, then you're in good shape. So, Dr. Asher, how do you kind of tell patients about that when people are kind of focused on survival rates? What are other good advice to tell them?
From a non-oncology perspective, I really try to focus on these ideas. So, and I believe me, I don't mean to make light of this, but one of the people I learned from, and we kind of talk about in our program, was a stage 4 cancer patient who, and this were his words, not mine, because I don't think it would mean anything. It would come from me. He said, in some ways, he was grateful for his diagnosis, and I never would tell anyone that they should feel grateful for what they're going through. But in his words, he said he's had people where, they had a sudden heart attack, or they, heaven forbid, died in a car accident, or just lost their life suddenly. And he had gone through his diagnosis for 7 years at this point. And he said that time, in his words, allowed him to reconcile what's most important. And again, he was putting his attention to the things that were important to him. And I think if that's what we focus on, right? Because we don't know. I mean, to your point, there are specialists who will give us their best guess, but ultimately, no one knows exactly how long we're going to be on this earth. And as long as we're focusing on the things that are most important, I think that's the best we can do.
That's really nice. I'm quoting you for everything, by the way. So if I say anything like intelligent, you'll know where it came from. Anyway, and now can a patient participate in this 6-week program remotely? I live in Northern California. Is it available online or only in person at Cedars?
So one of the nice things about the pandemic is we had to figure out how to do it on Zoom overnight. So we've had people all over the US over the last 2 years. So hopefully my email is on the slides that you have.